Buenos dias, amigos. In just a few hours, it will have been exactly 1 week since El Salvador's historic law recognizing Bitcoin as legal tender went into effect. While President Bukele accurately predicted a FUD storm like no other, Bitcoin has held its own pretty much since dipping to about 46,000. As President Bukele subsequently tweeted, it just gave him the opportunity to join us all in buying the dip.
This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy.
Happy Sunday, you sexy sat stackers, and welcome to the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast, Weekend Update Edition. As I previously stated, it has been a historic week for Bitcoin, despite some price volatility. And actually, the price hasn't been all that volatile if you don't take into account the 20% crash on Monday, which rebounded to about a 10% crash. But in general, Bitcoin has been hanging in there at about $46,000 all week, having stabilized after Bitcoin received a fair amount of FUD incoming surrounding El Salvador's brand new Bitcoin as legal tender law and the launch of their Chivo wallet. Currently, Bitcoin is $45,415, and that's down about $500 in the last few minutes, but still hovering at approximately that $46,000 range where it's been stuck since Monday. We are at a block height of 700,270. That's right, as the memes out there you've probably seen or maybe seen have stated, we have hit yet another all-time high in terms of block height, breaking 700,000 for the first time. Tee-hee. But all joking aside, it just goes to show, as Andreas Antonopoulos likes to say, and apparently Max Kaiser as well, tick-tock, new block. The FUD keeps coming, and Bitcoin just keeps adding blocks every 10 minutes, as Satoshi originally intended. Being a weekend, it's not too unusual that we've seen Bitcoin volumes come down a little bit. As we've discussed on previous episodes, Bitcoin volume has been lower than we'd like to see in general for a substantial period of time. Obviously, it's usually lower on the weekends, or at least it has been lower on the weekends. And right now, it is down to, as we would expect, it's currently averaging 2.25 transactions per second over the last 24 hours. That's down from about 3.15 transactions per second when we did our DCA Wednesday purchase just a couple of days ago. But that's actually a little bit better than the 2.23 transactions per second we saw on our last weekend update edition. If you're a regular listener, you know that I harp on transaction volume quite a bit because obviously when there's fewer transactions, it's a lot easier for people to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. When there's not as much trading going on, any large trade or any significant trade can put pressure either up or down and gives the market a lot more potential volatility than when there's a lot of trading going on. Depending on where you get your news, speculation continues to run rampant on who will be the next domino to fall in nation-state adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender. Speculation is that Panama might be next, or Paraguay might be next, or even Ukraine might be next, with headlines stating that Ukraine's President Zelensky is planning to make Bitcoin legal tender by the start of 2023, stating that, quote, Ukraine is a natural fit for such a plan, and that the Ukraine government has already instructed ministers to transform the country into a, quote, crypto-friendly nation, unquote. There is much debate on whether this is a power grab by the Ukrainian government to manipulate or regulate Bitcoin, or whether they legitimately want to become a Bitcoin-based economy. But then again, it's all speculation until we see what actually happens. Trust, don't verify, as the Bitcoin community is so fond of saying. That aside, however, it is becoming increasingly clear that despite the FUD and the amount of pressure that the IMF and the World Bank put on El Salvador to abandon its plans to make Bitcoin legal tender, more countries are realizing that if they don't join soon, that they're going to miss out. as obviously Bitcoin is a track record of rewarding early adopters more so than those who are later to the game. Obviously, it's all speculation until another country steps forward and makes Bitcoin legal tender like El Salvador did, but it would make sense that that we would see adoption grow around El Salvador in Central or South America, where people can see firsthand that Bitcoin is functioning and benefiting the people of El Salvador. But as highlighted by CNBC in an article on Thursday, El Salvador's new Bitcoin wallets could cost Western Union and similar companies $400 million a year, stating that in 2020, El Salvador received nearly $6 billion in remittances, which accounted for 23% of its gross domestic product. Obviously, remittances is one of the major use cases that's been highlighted by Bitcoin proponents since the very beginning. In fact, there's an Andreas Antonopoulos video that has to be at least 2 or 3 years old, where he says that if he wanted to be in the Bitcoin ATM business, he wouldn't even put the word Bitcoin anywhere on his ATMs. He would just simply have a big sign that said, "Send money to Mexico." And only time will tell, but I think it's fairly widely assumed that for the immediate future, remittances will be the number one use case for the Chivo wallet and El Salvador, at least in the short term. In the podcast world, something I'm certainly happy to see and something we've discussed a little bit in the last few episodes, Adam Meister is back. After a 4-week hiatus, we finally got an episode of the One Bitcoin Show. Apparently, the Bitcoin 2022 conference has picked Adam up as a sponsor, and we'll be paying for him to have one Bitcoin show a week. In addition to that, Adam is still adamant that he will only do a show if he's paid at least $100 to do so. And during his One Bitcoin show on Friday evening, he raised more than $100 from people in the chat. So it would be safe to assume that in addition to the show that's going to be sponsored by the Bitcoin 2021 conference, that there will be at least one additional show this coming week. And that's cool because Adam is an entertaining character, and he is certainly a lot more fun to listen to than some of the drier podcasts out there, probably this one included. And if you follow Bitcoin Twitter, you know that Ecoinometrics has a chart they put out every day that shows where the current price of Bitcoin is in relationship to the area defined by the 2013 and the 2017 bull runs. And couple of months ago when we had the big Elon dump, Bitcoin actually broke out of that range for the first time and has been significantly below the range ever since. Although when this dip seemed like it was bottoming out and we pumped up to about 52, it started paralleling the 2017 trend line a bit again, and that certainly gives some hope. Nonetheless, it's an interesting chart to look at. It certainly tends to put things into perspective if you believe in the 4-year cycle theory or the halving theory or in the stock to flow theory. Ecoinometrics tweeting out today that, conclusion, get ready for 6-figure BTC. Stay focused on the macro trend, and references that chart. Ecoinometrics on Twitter at Ecoinometrics puts out some pretty good stuff. I recommend you check them out. And speaking of the stock to flow model and the infamous Plan B at 100 trillion USD on Twitter, he's still sticking with his stock to flow model. He says that while we're basically at the bottom of the range, nothing has occurred yet that would invalidate his model. He did throw it out to his followers on Twitter a day ago, asking, do you think Bitcoin will reach 500,000, the 288,000 figure that his stock to flow cross asset model predicts, or the 100,000 that his stock to flow, the original stock to flow model predicts, or will Bitcoin simply stay below 100,000 by Christmas 2021? And the overwhelming response is that 46% think that Bitcoin will hit 100,000 by Christmas, in line with his original stock to flow model, with 33% forecasting that Bitcoin will stay below 100,000, and 15% predicting that the stock to flow cross asset model will be correct with a price of at least 288,000, and a mere 6% thinking that we'll break 500,000 by Christmas 2021. And again, that's Plan B, who is at 100 trillion USD on Twitter. And he does have a lot of scammers trying to glom onto him, as he's pointed out repeatedly. So be careful who you follow and make sure you're following the real at 100 trillion USD, the real Plan B. For whatever reason, Twitter won't give him a blue check mark, I guess because he's an anonymous, he's a NIM. And so that violates their blue check mark policy. But it would certainly be helpful if Jack would let Plan B have a blue check mark. While it's fairly obvious to me what his real tweets are and what the scam tweets are, some of them are pretty clever, and apparently enough people are falling for it that it has Plan B concerned. But the thing that does not have him concerned at this point, at least, is his stock to flow model, which he still thinks will get us to at least $100,000 by Christmas 2021. And all things considered, with all the FUD out there and with the threats that Bitcoin is starting to really materialize as far as central bank currencies' power to manipulate their monetary supply goes, and the traditional banking system, particularly as we just discussed with Western Union standing to potentially lose $400 million a year just in remittances to El Salvador as a result of the Bitcoin law in El Salvador. $46,000 is pretty darn good considering where we were just a year ago. Hey, if you find this content useful or entertaining, or if you're just feeling extraordinarily generous, there are a number of ways you can help support me in this podcast. The most obvious one is if you don't already have Cash App, there is a referral code in the show notes. And if you click on that link and set up a new Cash App account and follow their terms and conditions, you'll get $5 just for trying them out, and we'll get $5 as well. I've written several books, but the one you might know that's most relevant to this podcast is Understanding Bitcoin for Noobs, and that's available on both Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Obviously, purchasing either of my books would help support the podcast as well. And you can also support the podcast directly through the Anchor.fm website, and they include a support link automatically in the show notes. And last but not least, we also include a Base32 Bitcoin address in the show notes if you feel like helping us out by contributing Bitcoin. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast Weekend Update Edition. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening. And don't forget to join us Wednesday when we continue our DCA Wednesday series. As many of you know, we've been stacking $20 with a Bitcoin every Wednesday, and so far we've stacked 7 times for a total of $140. And while that might not seem like much, that number is continuing to grow, and dollar cost averaging is a long-term strategy, and we're going to keep it up until we all either become stinking filthy rich, Bitcoin goes to zero, or you guys just get bored and stop listening to me. But thanks again for listening, and as usual, keep stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.